I'm Mark Thorson. I'm the Program Director in General Studies at CAPS-GS, and we work with adult learners who are returning to school, and the General Studies program is designed for learners who have either no college experience or very little college experience, and it covers basically the first 2 years of school, the typical Gen Ed requirements. Adult learners bring a very high level of motivation and energy into the classroom. My experience is that compared with younger students, many adult learners are willing to put in sometimes amazing amounts of overtime in order for them to feel that they're getting something exactly right. And sometimes that's something that the teacher has to watch out for. Sometimes we need to set boundaries on our assignments to make sure that a student isn't spending 4.5, 5 hours on something that the teacher intended to last for just a few minutes. Now, the other side of this is that adults are motivated to come back to the educational environment because they want to change something in their life. It's not expected that a 47-year-old starts college. So when they return to college, they want it to make a difference in their life, and they want that to happen as soon as possible, possibly tomorrow morning at work. So one of the big things to be aware of is that adult learners are constantly looking for applications of whatever the topic is. Of course, their first inclination in terms of application are to things like professional life, family life, church participation, or whatever it is they're involved in. That's what's instinctive for them in looking for an application of what they learn. The final thing to mention, and this is something that virtually everybody who talks about adult learners would mention, is that they bring into the classroom a very high level of experience, and experiences of all kinds that go along with just living life. Sometimes, and really even in cases where the teacher might not expect it to happen, they have real experience on whatever the class topic is. But they also have just sort of generic experience in solving problems, achieving goals, providing leadership. We frequently have students who in the workplace are in positions of leadership and are asked by their supervisors and so forth to improve their educational levels so they can be promoted. So some of these people are really very accomplished people. Because of all this, they always learn as adults. They draw on their experience, they see implications, they make comparisons, they want to apply things. So these are the ways in which they interact with learning materials in a more dynamic way sometimes than younger students do. Well, of course, learning is learning, and there are always similarities between learning experiences for different types of learners. But there are some things that anyone involved with adult learners have to be aware of when they're working with folks who are a little older. Some of them have a kind of negative side to them. One is that adult learners are often under tremendous stress. They have family issues, they have workplace issues, sometimes they have financial problems, and frequently health problems. Because they're under so much pressure, sometimes like younger students, they do look for shortcuts in their learning. And they sometimes can be thought of as wanting to check items off a list. But on the other hand, we also need to be aware that adult learners are very often anxious. And one of the most important things I would say to a teacher who's trying to understand what the teacher is experiencing as responses from adult learners is that much of what you see is driven by anxiety. This can be because when they were younger they had educational experiences that left scars. This can be because they're high achievers who feel a sense of a need to keep achieving at a high level. It can very frequently be a matter of value for price. For example, many of our learners are actually getting tuition reimbursement from their workplace, and frequently that's based on a grade basis, so they actually get more of a percentage of their tuition reimbursed to them depending on whether they get an A or a B. So when we experience the fact that adult learners care a great deal about grades, I think we need to see it in that context of anxiety. And one of the biggest issues is that adult learners have a tendency to see the slightest mistake as a reflection on them sometimes. And so they might see, if they don't get full points for a particular assignment, they may see that as a major critical thing reflecting on their abilities. So these are some of perhaps the negative sides of working with adult learners. I think the biggest reason why I have found it so rewarding to work with adult learners is another point about what they're like, and that is that when they engage on a topic, they really engage in a topic. If you can get an adult learner to connect to the significance and relevance of a topic, they're liable to go all out in a way that's relatively rare with younger students. And that leads to a kind of interaction that you have not only between the teacher and the student, but you also have between different students in the classroom that, or in an online environment, which can really be exciting to be a part of. And so that's really rewarding to work with. And the other thing that's rewarding is, as I said a moment ago, since adult learners are so focused on application to their lives, it is very frequently the case that you can see a transformation in the student's life that is actually happening in a very short time frame. And so that can really be rewarding to see that happening in students. Well, there are several common threads that the adult learning literature talks about. And when we think about applying those things, I would start personally with the issue of relevance. The word relevance sometimes has a bad name amongst academics, because sometimes academics think, well, what this means is the student is not willing to learn anything that they didn't come here to learn, and it isn't connected to what they're doing at work. And that could be a negative way of seeing it. But when it comes to adult learners, to come back to the idea of application, adult learners return to the workplace looking to apply what they learn into their lives. Doing that, they expect some kind of relevance. And the thing is, if you can provide that relevance, if you can help them to discover that relevance, then you will find them enthusiastic participants. And my experience is that even in cases where the adult learner would have no built-in interest in a topic going in, once they find relevance in something, they really grab hold of it. As I mentioned, my background is to bring the liberal arts to adult learners. And so, for example, I teach a course in Western civilization. Well, our adult learners do not come back to college to learn about Charlemagne and Constantine. But when they begin to discover how relevant those topics are to the world that they live in, and when they begin to see how it helps them make sense out of the world they live in, then they get very excited and they get very engaged. So when I think of the word relevance, I see it as a challenge, that the educator needs to do whatever is necessary to cultivate connections of relevance in maybe a different way than you do with younger students, But once you get that to connect, then you can see powerful responses from the students. The other day I was teaching a course online, and we were having an e-chat, and the chat was about the Middle Ages. And one of the students wrote in the e-chat, "Is there going to be more mind-blowing stuff next week?" And that's an example of how you can help students discover relevance even in things that they hadn't originally thought of. Now, another couple of things in terms of adult theory is it is extremely important always to respect the adult learner as a sort of collaborator in the learning process. So you don't see the adult learner as a sort of subordinate, but rather you work with the adult learner in order to help that person discover. The goal is changing the life of the student rather than just sort of successfully presenting a body of material. It can be a matter of lots of levels of discipline for a teacher, and one of the ones that is, it's a real easy thing to understand, but it's something often forgotten. We must provide very prompt, fast, constructive feedback to our learners. And if you think of it in terms of that sense of respect, they are adults, we are adults, we're all busy. They have deadlines they have to meet with our assignments. Well, the teachers ought to meet deadlines as well. And so I generally feel my adult learners have assignments due every week. Well, by the time we meet again, my deadline is to give them feedback on what they did the last week. And the other thing to be said about that, and this is true probably of all learning, is that feedback within the process of learning can be helpful. Feedback after the process of learning has stopped is just about useless. So a lot of people sort of teach the class and then they provide a bunch of feedback after the class is already over and the student has no ability to change the grade or to improve. The possibility that the student will actually take that feedback in and pay attention to it and learn from it is just about nil. So for these reasons, it is extremely important that we show our students respect, we give them prompt feedback that constructively helps them to learn within the process of the course. And feedback afterward is not going to be as helpful. I'll mention a few things. One of the things that I've been surprised at as I've taught things, and these are often topics that the adult learners did not come to school thinking, boy, I want to learn more about that. But in the classroom, I very frequently have students say to me, well, you're passionate about your topic. And then they respond to that really well. Just recently, one student was talking to another student, and the first student said, well, he knows all these things, and the other one said, well, that's because he's passionate about it. So one of the things that I would strongly suggest is to bring your passion with you into your classroom. If you bring your passion about the relevance of your topic, whatever it is, then the learners are very likely to go with you and share that passion, at least to some extent. So bring your passion with you into the classroom. The next thing is, I would suggest, and these things are not elaborately complicated, but invest yourself and plan very carefully. Remember that a lot of these students are professional people, and they very frequently have had experiences of professionally produced learning experiences, seminars, and instruction that's put out by the company or whatever. So we need to be very professional in what we do, and that means that we need to really invest ourselves in planning carefully and always remembering that the focus is the learner. Now, more specifically, in terms of learning experiences, I would say that one of the keys is to push for peer collaboration. The instructor is presenting materials, but the students help each other learn. This is true in the cohort model, and it's even true in classes which don't have cohorts. The students really like to interact with each other and help each other discover things. So whatever kinds of techniques you can use to cultivate peer collaboration are great. One of the things that I find very helpful are Q&A forums. I do them in the classroom, I do them online. Q&A helps me know what specific things the learners want to know more about and understand better. And it also is great when one student poses a question and then other students help answer that question. Then not only are they hearing from someone other than the teacher, but they're also getting a sense, a sort of self-learning sense, that we can educate ourselves by working with these materials. Another technique that's like that, that I think is very helpful in our Blackboard learning environment, is any kind of discussion board opportunities. And I do that all the time. I have students post things, their reflections, and then I always force them to read and respond to at least two or more of the other students' postings. And that's where really powerful things happen in the dialogue, when one person posts some things and then the other person responds to it, and then a discussion starts to occur. Those are really effective kinds of learning. Now, I'm going to say something that's maybe a little bit contrary to what most people talk about when they talk about adult learning. One of the things that's often said about adult learners is that they are quick to go to the so-called higher levels of learning, critical reasoning, and so forth. That's true. I have a sense that because people know that that's the case, sometimes people are a little quick to prematurely go beyond the point where the learner just clearly cognitively masters the material. So I would say to an instructor not to be afraid of making sure that students master the material at a cognitive level. And I would also say that within limits, lecture can be a part of the mix. Sometimes teachers in an adult environment are sort of afraid to ever lecture. And I remember when I would first teach my Western civilization class, I would try to do everything without lecture in the classroom. And the students kept saying, yeah, but we really like it when you lecture. And so as long as it's not everything that's going on, as long as there's interaction going on and so forth, don't be afraid of a little bit of lecture. One of the good ways to do this that I've discovered recently is a technology that allows the teacher to prepare a PowerPoint lecture with the audio and put it online in a format where the student is in total control. They can jump around between the different slides, they can replay something, they can stop and start. This gives them control of the situation, and yet you're still accomplishing the explanation and perhaps some images that help them learn, that helps them master the reading materials. So some of those things can be helpful as well. A couple last things. Textbooks. We need to protect our adult learners' wallets and make sure that the textbooks are appropriate in quantity and in difficulty level, because we do have short classes, and we want to be sure that the adult learner who spends $78 for a textbook feels at the end, yeah, I got my money's worth out of that. And then the last thing I would mention is one of the greatest challenges, I think, in working with adult learners is to provide effective assignments that are well conceived so that they're the right amount of work, they're an appropriate kind of work. And one of the hardest things is to write the instructions for the assignment, because you have to have enough information there so the student isn't bewildered and not knowing what to do. And yet, if you have too much information in the assignment sheet, which is something I'm guilty of at times, then it becomes this big chore to figure out what the assignment is. So to find that perfect balance of an efficient assignment sheet that helps the student achieve the goal in an efficient manner without wasting a lot of time getting confused, that's really important for busy adult learners. The course that you're about to see is called Reading and Responding to the Arts. The students within the course are fairly new members of a general studies cohort. The general studies program is designed for adult learners with very little or no college experience, and it is more or less the first 2 years of college, and its purpose is to lay in the liberal arts skills and foundation that they can build on in degree programs. These students are in their third course, so they're very new to the program, and they are taking a course that is the classic arts appreciation course. This is part of our emphasis on critical reading skills, and it's part of our emphasis on helping students discover the value of liberal arts education in their experiences in life, including their experiences of the arts. We want to enhance your skills in these areas, your ability to analyze artistic features, to unpack layers of meaning, to see the connections between features of the text and the context in which it was produced, to trace the human dynamics involved, and to recognize themes that run through these materials. So those are the things that we're going to be trying to pursue. Now, if I say all that, you might think to yourself, well, that sounds a little scary, right? Because when you watch a movie or listen to music, a lot of people just sort of like to watch the movie and listen to music. But don't worry about that, because there's no expectation that when we begin, we're all at the same place, or that you have, I'm sure that different ones of you have different levels of knowledge of different kinds of the arts. We might have someone who's something of a photographer, we might have someone else who's a musician, etc., etc. So we come from different levels, but we're going to start together and we're going to see what we can build. So we're going to start the course with your instinctive reactions. And we've done that to some extent already. If you submitted your first assignment for the class, the reading response, I had nothing in mind where I wanted to say, well, this student has to come up with the following things. I wanted to see what came up for you. So when we start out, we start with where you begin. Jot down a couple of things that we're going to put up on the board so we can share as a group what your natural inclinations are in terms of the arts. When I say your natural taste, that is, if you're going to think about having some experience of the arts, whether it's reading a novel or watching a movie or listening to music or watching a dance or whatever it is, what are you inclined toward? And then these other questions. So I'll give you about 5 minutes to prepare. Yeah, just right there, that little bit at the top, the very top of the sheet. Well, I'm just going to throw up here, kind of put things together. So we'll just start over here and go around the room really quickly. And first we'll do this, then this, then this. So first of all, the aspect or the type of art that you're drawn to, the most. I'll put it music. Music, okay? Okay, that one could be popular. So just for fun.
Oh, I like hip-hop, right?
Okay, all right. Okay, next.
I'll say R&B music.
R&B, okay.
Poetry.
I'm sorry?
Poetry.
Poetry, all right.
Put drawing.
Drawing or art. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Fiction novels.
Okay, all right. Fiction?
Yes.
Well, we've got a wide range.
Yeah.
Last time I did this class, it was a lot narrower. It was like music and music and music. But go ahead.
Drama.
Drama, all right. We're covering all the bases here. Now, the next step of our little warm-up exercise tonight, I'm going to have us respond to 3 different kinds of art. And these I haven't prepared you for. Okay? So I would like you to take your anthology. That's a big, thick book, which is when we say anthology, we mean a book that collects a lot of smaller texts. And I would like you to look at page 255, and you'll see a brief poem called Dead Fires. Okay? And I'd like you to briefly read that poem, and then just like write a sentence or two of some response. And your response, totally up to you what your response is. Okay?
I was thinking ode to a bee sting.
Ode to a bee sting.
You know how somebody's allergic?
Okay. Okay. Now, when you say that, do I sort of get the sense that, like a bee sting, we don't normally think of as super serious, but if you're allergic, it's kind of an exaggerated
Absolutely.
reaction?
Absolutely.
So are you kind of feeling like there's a reaction here which may be larger than what's behind it or something? Or
Well, yeah, they're using balm. They're about to die. And I mean, I've seen it happen before. That's why it kind of popped in my head. I've seen someone stung that was allergic, and they kind of,
Yeah. Okay.
it was
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting response. Okay? We're going to leave that for a bit.
Oh.
And we'll actually come back to that again next week. Okay? Now, let's go to our second thing. This is something very different from the first. And I'm just going to go ahead and use my speakers here. It'll be, because I don't want to try and figure out the speakers here yet. But I'm going to play you a song. And once again, just listen to it, and then give whatever response you have. Hopefully it'll all load up okay. How about Relisha? Should we
Sure.
start with you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I couldn't really make out the words, but I definitely could make out the melody from the narrative slideshow. So I just wrote that I think that the genre of music was from the time of the Harlem Renaissance. It was juke
Okay.
joint music. That's what it reminded me of.
Harlem Renaissance, and you call it joint?
Juke
Oh,
joint.
juke joint. Yeah. Mhm. Here you go.
That's it?
What do you think of this?
statue?
This statue.
Oh, the statue.
I put either an Egyptian or Muslim queen.
Interesting, because we have Mother Mary and we have Muslim. Interesting. Okay?
I put the same thing. I just put an ancient queen making a heartfelt request to her people.
Ah, you have a sense of making a request.
But she also looks peaceful.
Peaceful. Now, someone said proud,
Wow.
and now I'm going to add peaceful. Okay? So I have a question for you. Let's talk about this. What do you think? Are all readings, that is, whoever we had here looking at that statuette, if a bunch of people saw snakes and somebody else saw something else or whatever, are all readings equally valid?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I see.
It's
Talk about
perception.
it. Talk about it.
Because it's
People-
perception. It's perception.
It's perception, okay?
How you
So,
see it.
okay, so you would say that each person having a reaction to the art is valid because that person is having it.
They have their own opinion, yes.
Okay. Right. Now I heard, and look, people who were saying yes can add to that, if they want. I also heard some people who had said no earlier. So those people should speak.
I just say yes because of exactly how we all looked at that last picture of the statue, and we all had different interpretations, but they're not wrong. I
Okay.
think they're all,
Yeah.
and it's what you perceive, it's what you saw, so to you that is right. You know, it might have been different to the artist who made it. That's a whole other question on its own, I think, but
Yes.
I think it's all valid.
And interestingly enough, when you say we all had reactions, there were also some common themes in a lot of people's reactions, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Now, I did hear some people saying no.
Well, I would say no because I want to know who validates.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So your instinct is there must be somebody who makes a decision about this. Let us add a little bit of information. Okay? Now, remember that song we played? That was done by someone you may have heard of. Okay? That was a song done by a guy who was known as Jelly Roll Morton. Okay? One of the great early jazz pianists. You see, the years there, you folks were not too far off in your guess of the years, were you? Okay? And you got the title. And that particular recording was made in 1939. Okay? Now, I don't want to go too much more into this because there will be a week in the class where we're going to look at, we're not going to go into huge detail about jazz, but we're going to look at the sense in which music was a factor in the Harlem Renaissance and had to do with the energies that were going on there and so forth. So the principle that I want us to see is that we never have some, Moses coming down from the mountain with the book of rules that tell us that this is an accurate reading or not. But what we do have is groups of people who find certain readings to be helpful and to be enlightening and to enrich their experience. So this is where readings get extra punch. And it has to do with that issue of common ground. And it has to do whenever you start to have a community who, for one reason or another, there's more than one person that can relate to the elements of that particular reading. What did we just do in our reading of the statute? What did we just do? We extended it, right? We took valid responses. And everything we've said there can be connected, I think, to what you folks were saying. But we took them further, didn't we? Because we added a little bit of information, and we added a little bit of analysis, and pretty soon we start to have a stronger reading, right? It isn't a question of one reading being right and one reading being wrong. It's a question of readings gaining strength as they become more detailed, to use the word that Lewis was talking about earlier, as they become more full of information and so forth. We are beginning to engage this art object more richly. We're seeing more there, right? Suppose we have two readings. One reading recognizes some things, one reading recognizes many things, and shows us all kinds of levels of it that we hadn't seen before. This is the great thing that people can do for each other, and the groups can do for each other, is that one person discovers things the other people missed, and then another person discovers something else. And if you were to read the critics of any major works of art, there will be a number of critics uncovering things that others had missed. So this is what we're kind of striving for, is an enriched engagement of the statute. And we support that reading. How do you, if you're going to make a claim, if you're going to say, okay, this statue is about an emergence of the human spirit out of organic form, I've got to support that reading somehow, right? And what do? I start pointing to details in the text, or in this case, in the statute. And I said, do you see, here's what I mean here, here's what I mean here. See how I give evidence for that? That's how you support a reading, with details. Okay? And we add information. And we just, once we know some things about the artist and the context in which it's produced, the technique and so forth, these things help us say richer things. If somebody's a musician, they'll be able to say things about Jelly Roll Morton's piano playing that I can't say because I'm not a musician. Okay? So all of these things help make for stronger readings. The more your reading does of all this, and you don't have to do it all. It's not like I'm saying you have to come up with a reading that does every single thing for everybody. That's impossible. Even the critics can't do that. What I'm saying is the more stuff there is to your reading, the more powerful it's going to be for other people, and the better of a chance you have for influencing the way other people see things. And sometimes you can help people discover things where they would not have paid attention to something, and then they start realizing, yeah, that's really interesting stuff, and they start responding more to a work of art than they would have previously. Okay? So that's kind of what this class is about. I do tend to have a sense with a class as to whether it was alive or not, and I thought that class was particularly lively, and I thought very astute. The observations that were being made by the class were very sharp, I thought, as something to work with in terms of the arts. This is a course that sort of introduces students to how to respond to the arts, and I think it does work well to start out by honoring the instinctive responses that students have, and then start gradually moving them towards a sense of a richer reading that can be done by drawing on the disciplines of the field. So that seemed to work well for the first night, and I look forward to the rest of the classes with that group. Technology actually plays quite a role in my classroom, and I think in all that we do at CAPS-GS. And there's kind of a double side to it. When you think about technology with adult learners, there is a negative side because there are quite a few adult learners who are uncomfortable with technology, who aren't necessarily confident in their ability to use technological tools and computers. However, we do need to beware of generalizations. The fact is, many of our adult learners use computers all day long and are very comfortable with them. However, the big thing to keep in mind because of that is if you're going to do technological things, you really have to take pains to make sure that there's a smooth and comfortable initiation stage for learners who are uncomfortable with technology to begin with. Now, having said that, I think technology can play a great role for adult learners because these, after all, are adults. And one of the keys to working with adults is that the educator of adults would want to give adult learners zones of control over their learning experience, perhaps more so than with younger students. Well, technology is a great place for this because all kinds of things that are done in a traditional classroom where the teacher stands up front and controls what happens can be placed into a technological context and the adult can control it. For example, the adult can decide when to view something, whether to view it more than once. You can post things that are supplemental learning, which some adults will want to get into and others won't. Many of the dimensions of what's often done in a classroom can be done in an online environment. So, for example, certain kinds of lecture, which are basically there to teach the core cognitive mastery, can be put into a context where adults are in control of it. And you can use audio and visual effects to appeal to different types of learning. Using the narrated slideshow, I was able to create a venue that the students could turn to, and they could get us connected to the context, and then we had much more time in the classroom to do interactive kinds of things. Here's the first slide from my narrated slideshow, and we'll look at a couple of others.
Reading and responding to the arts, eh? For some students that can be a little bit scary, but I would like to try to reassure you that what we're going to be doing in the class is not hopefully teaching some sort of secret language, but rather cultivating the responses that we have to artistic texts. We begin with your natural responses. And keep in mind that when we say artistic texts, we could mean novels, poems, paintings, music, films, etc.
That sets up the context, and then the slideshow goes on to lay in some of the specifics of that. It, for example, looks at the Reconstruction after the Civil War, which led to the Great Migration, in which many African Americans moved to the northern cities, and then eventually many of them settled in Harlem. This created some of the context for the Harlem Renaissance. The show can lay in some of these background points, and what's really helpful about this is that the student can do exactly what we're doing right now, which is to jump around and go from one slide to the other, to stop and start, to review something that was missed the first time, or whatever. So this tool, I think, can do a wonderful job of taking some of the basic cognitive things that need to be taught, putting them into an attractive format with which the learner is in control, and then freeing up time in the classroom to do higher level learning activities. Another great dimension of technology for adult learners is online collaboration. Discussion boards, Q&A exercises, for example. I love Q&As because, on the one hand, they teach me what the adult learners want to learn more about, and on the other hand, the learners can help each other learn. So these kinds of things can cultivate the dimensions of self-learning that are important for adults. I think you have to begin with a sense of adult learners and keep in mind their situation. First of all, you have to remember they are extremely busy. This does not mean that you can't challenge them to do work. It does mean that you don't want to waste their time. It's also the case, especially in a program like mine, that we'll frequently have learners who remember experiences from the past where they have emotional scars from scary tests and so forth. Furthermore, most adult programs, such as ours, are done in an accelerated model, so we move very fast. We might have 6 weeks to go through a large amount of material. Well, given all of that, then there are a couple of things I think that follow from that. First is, like all assessment, you need to focus on the learner learning, but this is particularly true for adults because adults are in a position where they want to feel their life is changing. So your assessments need to say, okay, what is it the adult is going to learn and therefore apply to life and make a change in their life, and then figure out assessment activities that lead to that. Another point is, given the busy the pace of life for adult learners and also the pace of our learning, there's really no time to waste on memorizing things. So the idea of having a traditional memory test is a really, really bad idea. We actually tell our students that they won't be doing that kind of a thing. However, that doesn't mean you can't do some things that will assess straightforward cognitive mastery. For example, I like to do what I call reading explorations, in which I give the learners a set of questions in advance that they can keep in mind as they read something. And they work out their answers, and then they post those answers. And so they're working out the answers to the questions that are cognitive questions that you'd see on a test, but they never have to worry about memorizing anything. The Blackboard assessment tool is very good for this kind of a thing. In general, though, adult learners like to gravitate toward the higher levels of learning, the critical thinking levels, and that usually means writing assignments. Now, that can include formal writing assignments like essays, and that's important. And when a writing assignment is given, it is important to maintain high standards of basic writing skill. However, in doing so, especially in an accelerated time frame, it's also important to provide immediate feedback and to provide opportunities for revision. But sometimes the tendency is to assume, well, I need to give 5 formal essay assignments, when really you only need 1. And the other thing that can be very powerful are informal writing assignments. Reading responses which are relatively casual, discussion boards where the students talk to each other about what they're learning. These kinds of things can cultivate mastery at the higher levels of critical thinking without having the student constantly fretting over producing a perfectly edited piece of work. Of course, there's room for oral work in the classroom, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a big formal presentation that the students will be afraid of. It can be informal kinds of things. Adult learners like to collaborate, and one of the powers of our cohort model is that the learners help each other learn. So group work can be very effective. However, the deadly danger for group work is when you have students who don't participate, and so you have to be sure to encourage full participation, and you have to be sure to protect the hardworking student who feels that he or she might be let down by group members. I have often said Bethel has a niche in education in the upper Midwest, and that niche is based on a balance between two things. On the one hand, we are an evangelical community of learners or of scholars with a firm faith commitment. On the other hand, we are also a liberal arts institution which is firmly committed to critical thinking, not dogmatism. We are not a Bible school, we are a true liberal arts institution. So at Bethel, we have to always balance the two sides of that, the faith commitment and also the critical thinking. The first step, I think, in faith integration is for the instructor to work at the question for him or herself. You can't really integrate your materials with faith if you haven't really thought through some of the dimensions of that. And in some cases, especially as I work with teachers in the different liberal arts, in some cases it may seem less obvious where the faith integration is, but it is there. Remember that the liberal arts tradition began in medieval universities, which were associated with the church, and by scholars who always assumed that everything was a part of faith. So you can find it. So, for example, if I teach a course in business writing, you might say, well, what's the faith integration concept there? Well, I'll spend some time with Acts chapter 17, which shows the rhetorical mastery of the Apostle Paul as he dealt with people with a very different viewpoint from his own. So the first step is for the teacher to explore and develop the dimensions of faith integration for him or herself. The next step is to approach the learners. And in CAPS-GS, we are a little bit different because unlike the seminary or the college, we do not ask our learners to make a faith commitment when they enter our program. As a result of that, we do have quite a few evangelical students. After all, that's the basis of Bethel's reputation. But we also have many students who come from other faith traditions. We have lots of Lutherans, lots of Catholics. We have international students who may very well be Anglicans. They may be Seventh-day Adventists. They may be Jehovah's Witness. We've had several Muslim students in our programs. And we have many students for whom faith was something they remember a little bit about when they were 7 and they haven't really thought about for 30 years. So we have a wide variety of students. So how do we approach that? Well, we start out with standing firmly on our faith commitment. We come before our students and we say, we approach these topics from the point of view of our evangelical faith. But we also need to be very active in openly affirming our respect for other faith viewpoints. The key is to balance the fact that we are evangelical on the one hand, but on the other hand, we want our students to have a safe experience even if their faith commitment is something else. I believe very strongly that we in the classroom are not there to evangelize. We are there to teach. Now, evangelical opportunities may develop out of that outside the classroom, but I believe strongly that it is unethical for an educator to try to pressure students into conforming to some religious viewpoint. So, we need to have a classroom that is open and respectful of different viewpoints. One of the challenging things is when we have students with a strong religious viewpoint who are not necessarily tolerant of each other. And that does happen. Sometimes there are cultural clashes between those that have some dogmatic intolerance, or in some cases we have members of a patriarchal tradition who have trouble showing respect for women learners and so forth. So we need to handle some situations like that. But when it comes to faith integration, I would reaffirm the fact that Bethel arose in a pietistic, irenic context. That means that people like John Alexis Edgren, who founded Bethel, believed in a core faith, but they also believed in avoiding dogmatism and avoiding quarrels based on dogmatism and maintaining an open and irenic, that is to say, peaceful relationship with other viewpoints. So that is the challenge that we face in our classrooms.